They told me the night shift at Lincoln Convenience Store would be quiet. Just stock the shelves, cash out the few customers that wander in, and try not to fall asleep. Easy, right? I should have known better. Nothing's ever easy when it comes to graveyard shifts. The clock on the wall read 11:56 p.m. as I walked in, the fluorescent lights buzzing softly overhead. The place reeked of stale coffee and cleaning products, and the rows of dusty canned goods and snack aisles stretched like a labyrinth of loneliness. My coworker, Todd, threw me the keys as he bolted out the door with a half-hearted good luck. It was my first night alone. At first, it was boring, just like they said it would be. I leaned on the counter, scrolling through my phone while the hum of the old refrigerators filled the silence. A couple of drunks staggered in around 1:30 a.m., giggling and smelling like spilled vodka. They grabbed a pack of gum and left without any trouble. But then, the doorbell chimed again. It was almost 2 a.m., and I swear I hadn't heard anyone park outside. No footsteps on the gravel either. Yet the door had swung open on its own, slowly, like someone was holding it for a ghost. "Hello?" I called out. No one answered. I craned my neck to peek down the aisles, my pulse quickening. Nothing. Just rows of junk food and a cooler full of day-old sandwiches. I stepped out from behind the counter and walked toward the door, thinking maybe it was the wind. As I reached out to close it, I saw the faint outline of something. No, someone. Standing in the parking lot. They weren't moving. They were tall and lanky, with a hoodie pulled tight over their face, and their arms hung limply at their sides. The parking lot was dark, lit only by a flickering streetlight, but I could feel their eyes on me even though I couldn't see them. My stomach twisted into knots. I stepped back inside and locked the door. For the next half hour, I couldn't focus on anything else. Every time I glanced at the security monitors, that figure was still there, still motionless, standing in the exact same spot. I told myself it's just a weirdo, maybe a drunk who got lost. They'll leave, but they didn't. By 3 a.m., the cameras started glitching. Just static and weird flashes of movement that didn't make sense. 1 second, the parking lot was empty. The next, I'd catch a glimpse of the figure standing closer. Closer. Each time, just a few feet nearer to the store, like they were creeping forward when I wasn't looking. By 3:30 a.m., they were at the edge of the glass doors. By 3:30 a.m., they were right at the glass doors. I froze behind the counter, watching the figure through the security screen. They still hadn't moved, no twitch of a hand, no tilt of the head, just standing there, facing the door. Their hood obscured their face, but I could feel their gaze burning through the glass, straight into me. The doorbell didn't chime, and the door didn't open. But the unsettling part? The lock was still engaged. There was no way they could have gotten inside, but when I glanced up from the monitor, the figure was suddenly in the store. They were standing at the back of the first aisle. My breath caught in my throat. The store was completely silent except for the steady hum of the refrigerators. I gripped the edge of the counter, trying to convince myself my mind was playing tricks on me. "Hello?" I called, my voice shaky and way too loud in the emptiness. No response. I couldn't see their face, just the outline of their body, tall, unnaturally thin, like they'd been stretched out too far. Something about the way they stood didn't feel human. Their shoulders were stiff, their heads slightly cocked, as if they were listening for something I couldn't hear. My heart pounded as I debated calling the cops. But when I blinked, the figure disappeared. I scrambled to the monitor, frantically flipping through the camera feeds. No sign of them. The aisles were empty. The parking lot was empty. I was about to convince myself I'd imagined it. Too much caffeine, too little sleep, when the bell above the door rang. My stomach plummeted. But it wasn't the figure. It was a man, about my age, with scruffy hair and a wrinkled hoodie. He looked nervous, glancing over his shoulder as he stepped inside. "Hey man," he said, his voice low. Sorry, are you open?" I nodded, still trying to calm my racing heart. "Yeah, we're open. You all right?" He shook his head, his face pale. "Something's out there," he said. "In the woods." His voice trembled, and he kept looking over his shoulder toward the window. I was walking home, and I swear something's been following me. I heard it breathing. I thought I'd lose it if I came in here, but now I'm not so sure. I stared at him, my skin crawling. What did you see? He hesitated. I didn't see it, but I heard it. It sounded like it was right behind me. Big, like bigger than a person. And I swear I saw eyes in the trees. Yellow eyes. The words sent a chill down my spine. I glanced toward the glass doors, half expecting to see those eyes staring back. But the parking lot was still empty. Just the flickering streetlight and the distant shadows of the forest. I'll call someone, I said, fumbling for the store phone. The cops or animal control or the power cut out. The humming of the refrigerators stopped. The overhead lights went black. The only light came from the dim red glow of the exit sign over the door and the faint blue static of the monitors, which flickered once, twice, then died. The guy swore under his breath, pulling his hoodie tighter. This is bad, man. This is really bad. Stay calm, I whispered, though I wasn't calm at all. My hands were shaking as I pulled my phone from my pocket, but the signal was gone. It's probably just a power outage. Then we both heard it. A soft, wet dragging sound, coming from somewhere deep in the aisles. It was faint at first, like something heavy being pulled across the tiled floor. Then it got louder, closer, until it sounded like it was just on the other side of the counter. Neither of us dared to move. The dragging stopped. Silence. Then came a voice, high-pitched, lilting, like a child singing a nursery rhyme. The words were distorted, garbled, and echoed in the darkness of the store. Come out, wherever you are." The guy's eyes widened in terror, and he grabbed my arm. "What the hell was that?" he hissed. I shook my head, unable to answer. My heart felt like it was about to burst out of my chest. And then, the voice changed. It was deeper now, raspier, but still playful, like it was taunting us. Came from somewhere to our left. "I see you." The man grabbed a can of soup off the counter and held it like a weapon. "We need to get out of here," he whispered, but I couldn't move. My legs were rooted to the spot, my body paralyzed by fear. Then something moved in the shadows. It moved fast, too fast. A blur in the darkness, darting between the shelves. I only caught glimpses. A long, twisted arm here, a hunched silhouette there, the faint glint of something sharp. My breath hitched as I clutched the edge of the counter, trying to force my body to react, but it was like my limbs had stopped listening to me. The guy, let's call him Jake, because I never did get his name, wasn't as frozen as I was. He tightened his grip on the can of soup like it was Excalibur, his knuckles white. "Do you have a back exit?" he whispered urgently. I nodded, finally finding my voice. "Yeah, in the stockroom," but the voice interrupted me. It was right behind us now, low and mocking, dripping with malice. "You can run, but I'll find you." Jake and I spun around, but there was nothing there, just empty aisles stretching into pitch blackness. The air felt heavier, colder, like the temperature had dropped 10 degrees in a matter of seconds. My breath came out in shaky white puffs, and I realized with a jolt that I could feel it now. Whatever was out there, it wasn't just hiding. It was watching, and it was enjoying this. "Go," Jake whispered, shoving me toward the door to the stockroom. "We need to move now." I stumbled toward the door, fumbling with the keys in my pocket as my hands trembled uncontrollably. Behind me, I heard the faint scrape of claws, or was it nails, against the tiled floor. Jake stayed close, his eyes darting around the darkness like a cornered animal. I finally got the stockroom door open, and we rushed inside, slamming it shut behind us. The tiny room smelled like cardboard and cleaning supplies, and the flickering emergency light above us cast long, jittery shadows. Jake shoved a metal shelving unit in front of the door, his chest heaving as he tried to catch his breath. For a second, we just stood there, listening. The store beyond the door was dead silent. "Do you think it's gone?" I whispered. Jake shook his head. "Things like that don't just leave." I didn't ask what he meant by things like that. Honestly, I didn't want to know. I crept toward the back exit, my sneakers squeaking against the concrete floor. The door was an old metal thing with a push bar, and I prayed it wasn't locked. I pressed my hand against it, ready to push it open, when the sound started again. That same dragging noise, soft and wet, like something heavy being pulled across the floor. Only now it was right outside the stockroom door. My stomach turned as I realized it wasn't just dragging. It was scraping, like nails or claws raking against the tile. Jake grabbed a mop handle from the corner and held it like a spear. If it comes through, we fight. I wanted to laugh. Fight? With a mop and a can of soup? Whatever was out there would tear us apart before we even got a swing in. But I nodded anyway, because what else could I do? The scraping stopped. Then, slowly, the door handle began to turn. I froze, my heart slamming against my ribs. The metal shelving unit groaned as something pushed against the door from the other side. It wasn't a hard push, just enough to let us know it was there. Watching, waiting. Jake stepped forward, gripping the mop handle tighter. "Stay back," he muttered, though whether he was talking to me or the thing outside, I couldn't tell. The handle stopped turning. For a moment, the world was silent. I held my breath, my pulse pounding in my ears. Then came the voice again, clearer this time, and impossibly close. It sounded like it was speaking directly into my ear. "Knock! Knock!" The door exploded inward. The force of it sent the shelving unit crashing to the floor, scattering boxes of paper towels and cleaning supplies everywhere. Jake yelled, swinging the mop handle wildly, but whatever came through that door wasn't fazed. It moved too fast, a blur of shadows and glinting eyes and twisted limbs. It hit Jake like a truck, knocking him to the ground with a sickening thud. I screamed and bolted for the back exit. My hands fumbled for the push bar, slamming it open just as Jake let out a guttural, blood-curdling scream behind me. I didn't look back. Couldn't. The cold night air hit me like a slap, and I sprinted into the darkness behind the store. The gravel crunched beneath my feet as I ran, my lungs burning, my legs threatening to give out. Somewhere behind me, I could hear heavy, wet footsteps gaining on me. And then I saw it, the thing chasing me. It was tall, impossibly tall, with limbs that stretched unnaturally long and a head that tilted at an odd angle, like it didn't quite understand how its own body worked. Its skin was gray and mottled, stretched tight over sharp, angular bones. But its face, God, its face. It was wrong. A hollow void where its eyes should have been, and a mouth that stretched too wide, filled with teeth that looked more like shards of glass. It grinned at me, and then it laughed. The laughter echoed through the night, a sound so distorted it barely resembled anything human. High-pitched giggles melted into guttural growls, like it couldn't decide what it wanted to be. Every hair on my body stood on end as I sprinted into the darkness, my legs pumping harder than they ever had before. Behind me, the thing moved with unnatural speed, its long limbs propelling it forward like some kind of horrifying insect. I risked a glance over my shoulder and immediately regretted it. It wasn't running. It was crawling, its arms and legs bending at grotesque angles as it scrambled after me on all fours. "Help!" I screamed, my voice cracking in desperation. But the empty field behind the store offered no help, no salvation. Just rows of tall grass and shadows that seemed to stretch on forever. I spotted a narrow service road up ahead, barely visible under the flickering light of a single lamppost. If I could just make it there, maybe I could find a place to hide, or flag down a car, or something. The thing behind me let out a shriek, a horrible, ear-splitting wail that made my vision blur and my knees buckle. I stumbled, nearly falling, but somehow managed to keep moving. My chest burned, my throat raw from gasping for air, but I didn't stop. I hit the service road and darted toward the lamppost. The light felt like a small sliver of safety, even if it was just an illusion. But as I reached the edge of the lampost's glow, I realized with a sinking feeling that the road was empty. No cars, no houses, just more darkness stretching out into nothingness. The laughter came again, closer this time. I turned, backing toward the lamppost as the thing emerged from the grass. It stood upright now, its limbs cracking and popping as it unfolded itself to its full, horrifying height. Its head tilted to the side, almost curiously, as if it were studying me. For a moment, neither of us moved. The thing stood just outside the circle of light, its hollow eyes fixed on me. Then, slowly, it raised one long, bony finger and pointed directly at me. "Found you," it rasped, its voice low and echoing, like it was speaking from inside my own head. I didn't think. I just ran. The road stretched endlessly ahead, the darkness pressing in from all sides. My feet slapped against the pavement, every step echoing like a gunshot in the still night air. I could hear the thing behind me, its footsteps heavy and deliberate now, like it knew I had nowhere to go. And then, up ahead, I saw it, a building. Small, squat, with a faint light glowing from a window. It looked like an old maintenance shed, probably abandoned, but it was my only chance. I veered off the road, cutting through the grass as I made a beeline for the shed. The door was ajar when I reached it, creaking softly as I pushed it open. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of oil and mildew. Rusted tools and broken machinery littered the floor, casting long, jagged shadows in the dim light. I shoved the door closed behind me and locked it, my hands shaking so badly it took 3 tries to slide the bolt into place. For a moment, I allowed myself to breathe. My heart was pounding so hard it felt like it might burst, but at least I had a door between me and that thing. I leaned against the wall, trying to quiet my gasping breaths, and listened. Silence. Maybe I'd lost it. Maybe the door rattled. I froze, my blood running cold. The thing was out there, testing the handle. Slowly, methodically, I backed away from the door, my eyes darting around the room for something, anything, I could use as a weapon. My hand closed around a rusted crowbar, and I gripped it tightly, holding it out in front of me like a lifeline. The rattling stopped. Then, the voice came again, muffled through the door but still sickeningly clear. "You can't hide forever." The door began to shake violently, the wood splintering under the force of whatever was pounding against it. I stumbled backward, clutching the crowbar like my life depended on it, which, at this point, it probably did. With a deafening crack, the door flew off its hinges. The thing ducked as it stepped inside, its twisted limbs contorting to fit through the narrow doorway. It stood there for a moment, its head nearly scraping the ceiling, and grinned at me with that impossibly wide, glass-shard mouth. I screamed and swung the crowbar as hard as I could, connected with a sickening thud, but the thing barely flinched. Instead, it tilted its head, as if amused by my feeble attempt to fight back. Then it lunged. I barely had time to react. It moved so fast, its long arms reaching for me with fingers that ended in jagged, claw-like tips. I ducked and swung again, aiming for its legs this time. The crowbar struck its knee, and this time, it did react, letting out an ear-piercing shriek as it stumbled backward. I didn't wait to see what happened next. I bolted past it, out the door and back into the night. I didn't look back. Couldn't. The thing's shriek still echoed in my ears as I sprinted into the night, the grass whipping at my legs and the cold air stabbing at my lungs. Somewhere behind me, I heard its footsteps, heavy, uneven, but terrifyingly fast. It wasn't done with me. Not yet. My eyes darted around, searching desperately for anywhere to hide, but the landscape was endless. A stretch of open fields, patches of forest in the distance, and that cursed service road cutting through it all. No cars, no houses, no hope, except there, a gas station. The neon sign flickered weakly in the distance, glowing red against the black horizon. It wasn't close, but it was something. My legs burned as I pushed myself harder, every step feeling like I was dragging weights behind me. I could hear the thing gaining on me, its guttural breathing growing louder, closer. And then I tripped. My foot caught on something, an exposed root or a chunk of uneven pavement, I don't even know, and I went down hard, slamming into the dirt. Pain shot through my knees and palms as gravel bit into my skin. For a second, the world spun, my vision swimming with stars. Then I heard it, the sound of something wet and heavy hitting the ground. It was right behind me. I rolled onto my back, and there it was. Its hollow face loomed above me, tilted slightly as if it were curious. Up close, the details were worse than I'd realized. Its skin wasn't just gray. It was wrong, textured like scorched earth, cracked and flaking in places. Its hollow eyes seemed to ripple, as if something was moving beneath the surface. And that mouth, that awful, too-wide grin stretched even further, revealing rows of jagged teeth that seemed to shift and multiply in the dim light. For a moment, neither of us moved. It just stared at me, its long limbs twitching slightly, like it was holding itself back. Then it whispered, "Run." It didn't need to tell me twice. I scrambled to my feet and took off toward the gas station, adrenaline overriding the pain in my knees. The thing let out another shriek, so loud it made my ears ring, and I knew it was right behind me. The flickering neon sign grew closer, and I could see the station's lights glowing faintly through the darkness. I hit the parking lot at full speed, nearly collapsing as I reached the glass doors. They were locked. Of course they were locked. "Help!" I screamed, banging on the glass with both fists. "Please, someone let me in." Inside, I saw movement. A man behind the counter, his face pale with confusion. He stared at me for a second, then his eyes darted past me, widening in horror. Without hesitation, he hit a button beneath the counter, and the door buzzed open. I stumbled inside, slamming the door shut behind me. "Lock it," I yelled, and the man didn't hesitate, twisting the deadbolt into place. "What the hell is going on?" he demanded, his voice shaking. Before I could answer, the thing hit the glass. The entire front of the gas station shuddered as its body slammed into the door, its claws scraping against the glass with an ear-splitting screech. The man behind the counter cursed, backing away as the thing peered inside, its head twisting unnaturally to get a better look at us. "Is this some kind of joke?" the man whispered, his face ashen. "No," I snapped. "Do I look like I'm joking? That thing is trying to kill me." The thing pressed its face against the glass, its grin widening. The lights inside the gas station flickered, and I realized with a sinking feeling that it was getting stronger. Every time it got closer, the air seemed heavier, colder. Then it spoke again, its voice muffled but still bone-chilling. "Let me in." The man behind the counter shook his head, panic written all over his face. "What is that? What the hell is that?" "I don't know," I shouted. "Just don't let it in." The thing slammed against the door again, harder this time. Cracks spiderwebbed across the glass, and I knew it wouldn't hold much longer. My eyes darted around the gas station, looking for something, anything that could help us. That's when I saw it. A red handle on the wall. The emergency fire alarm. I didn't have a plan. I didn't even know if it would work. But I sprinted toward it, yanking the handle down with all my strength. The alarm blared to life, a piercing wail that made me flinch. Outside, the thing froze, its head snapping toward the sound. For a moment, it just stood there, its body twitching violently. Then it let out a howl, a horrible, distorted scream that rattled the windows and disappeared. 1 second it was there, and the next it was gone, like it had melted into the shadows. The alarm continued to wail, the red lights flashing wildly, but the thing didn't come back. Not immediately, anyway. The man behind the counter stared at me, his chest heaving. What the hell was that? I didn't have an answer. My whole body was shaking, and my mind was a whirl of panic and exhaustion. "I don't know," I whispered, "but I don't think it's gone for good." We both turned to look at the shattered glass door, the cracks spreading like veins through the reinforced surface. And then the lights went out. The gas station was plunged into total darkness. The blaring fire alarm cut out mid-scream, leaving us in a silence so thick it felt alive. My breathing was ragged, every gasp loud in the oppressive quiet. The only light came from the faint glow of the neon sign outside, casting fractured shadows through the cracked glass door. The guy behind the counter, let's just call him Rick, fumbled for his phone, his face illuminated briefly by the screen's glow. "No signal," he muttered, his voice trembling. I grabbed a flashlight from the shelf near the register and clicked it on, the beam cutting through the darkness. "We need to get out of here," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "If that thing comes back..." A deep, guttural noise cut me off, a low growl, echoing from somewhere inside the gas station. Rick's eyes widened. Inside, he whispered. I whipped the flashlight around, the beam darting across shelves of chips and candy bars. The growl came again, louder this time and closer. My stomach dropped as I realized it wasn't just one noise. It was two. No, three. There were more of them. The sound of claws scraping against tile filled the air, coming from all around us. I spun in circles, the flashlight shaking in my hands, but I couldn't see anything. Just shadows that seemed to shift and move, slithering closer. Over here, Rick hissed, ducking behind the counter. I scrambled to follow him, crouching down as the growling grew louder. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might burst. Rick reached under the counter and pulled out a shotgun. "I keep it for emergencies," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I think this qualifies." The first creature appeared before he could even cock it. It lunged out of the shadows, its long limbs twisting unnaturally as it crawled over the counter. The beam of my flashlight caught its face. No eyes, just deep, hollow sockets, and that same horrible grin. Its body was wrong, stretched too thin, with joints that bent in ways they shouldn't. Rick screamed and fired. The shotgun roared, and the creature flew backward, crashing into a shelf of potato chips. For a moment, I thought it was dead, but then it twitched. Its head snapped toward us, and it let out an ear-splitting shriek, its grin stretching impossibly wide. Then the others appeared. 3 more of them emerged from the shadows, crawling on all fours like grotesque spiders. Their hollow eyes glowed faintly in the darkness, and their teeth, jagged and glinting like broken glass, clacked together in unison. "Go!" Rick yelled, firing again. The blast tore into one of the creatures, sending it sprawling, but the others kept coming. I grabbed a metal bat from the corner and bolted for the back exit, Rick close behind me. The creatures were fast, too fast. One of them skittered along the ceiling, its claws digging into the tiles as it darted toward us. Rick turned and fired, blowing a hole through the ceiling and sending the creature crashing to the floor. But the others were relentless. We burst through the back door and into the cold night air. The parking lot stretched out before us, empty and eerily silent. Rick slammed the door shut behind us, jamming a nearby metal pipe through the handle to keep it locked. "We need to get to my truck," he panted, pointing to an old pickup parked at the edge of the lot. I nodded, gripping the bat tightly as we sprinted toward the truck. But as we reached it, I realized the creatures weren't behind us anymore. They weren't chasing us. They were waiting. One of them stood on the roof of the truck, its head tilted at an unnatural angle as it watched us. 2 more crawled out from underneath the vehicle, their bodies twisted and twitching. "Get in," Rick shouted, firing at the closest one. The blast knocked it back, and I didn't wait for a second invitation. I scrambled into the passenger seat as Rick jumped into the driver's side, fumbling with the keys. The engine sputtered once, twice. The creatures moved closer. "Come on, come on," Rick yelled, slamming his hand against the steering wheel. The truck finally roared to life, and Rick floored it, the tires screeching as we tore out of the parking lot. I looked back as the gas station disappeared into the distance. The creatures were standing in the lot, their hollow eyes glowing faintly in the darkness. They didn't chase us. They just stood there, watching, their grins stretching wider and wider until they disappeared from view. We drove in silence for what felt like hours, the road stretching endlessly ahead. Neither of us spoke, too shaken to process what had just happened. Finally, Rick broke the silence. "You think it's over?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. I didn't answer. I didn't know. When we reached town, I climbed out of the truck, my legs shaking beneath me. Rick handed me a flashlight and a look that said, "Take care of yourself." Then he drove off, his taillights disappearing into the night. I made it home just before dawn, locking every door and window before collapsing onto the couch. But even as the sunlight crept in through the blinds, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. And then I heard it, a soft, familiar voice, whispering from the shadows of my living room. "Knock, knock."